If you're lucky enough to actually have grown some wheat, you probably have something like this in your house right now. Now, knowing how to store this is real important, because if the grain was harvested with a little too much moisture, you can have some real problems develop real quick. For instance, it can mold, it will attract insects, you have fungi growing in there, all of which are not good for grain. What you need to do in order to keep this at a maximum quality is, if you harvested it 15% or less moisture, you can go ahead and put it directly into freezer bags and put it in your freezer if you have room. You can also keep it in a cool place for anywhere up to about 5 months, as long as it's dry, cool, fairly dark. If it isn't dry enough, what you need to do is put it into a paper bag, lay the paper bag on its side after you've closed the bag with some tape, and then put it on some slats on the floor, or again in a cool place, preferably around 70 degrees. But don't put it directly on the floor, because air won't be able to circulate under it. Let it sit there for a few days, turn the bag over, stir the wheat a little bit to let the moisture gradually dry out of there. Then about a week later, turn it over again and leave it there for at least a month. Now, this helps not only in letting the wheat dry, but if the wheat is too green, you will not be able to get good flour out of it either. It won't work well for you. So you need to let it cure during that period of time. Now, once you have wheat to this stage, if you have your own mill, you can go ahead and make bread flour from it. However, most of us don't, and you won't be able to get the wheat ground fine enough that you'll be able to get a good flour from it. You'll have too many large pieces of bran in there that will cut the gluten that you're trying to develop and make your bread come out very, very flat. So what we're going to do instead, we've started with wheat at this stage, which you can get at health food stores and some grocery stores for a fairly inexpensive price if you haven't grown your own. And we're going to make cracked wheat from it. Now, this is the same kernels here that I soaked overnight. I took a cup of these wheat kernels and soaked them in 2 cups of warm water overnight. They absorbed a fair amount of the water, and they also become fairly soft. I can cut into them easily with my fingernail at this point in time. Now, taking those in the morning, or 8 hours later, whichever, you can then put that in a blender. Now, these will blend up fine enough that you can crack them. Now, you don't want to mush it up too much, or it becomes too gluey, but crack it up enough in a blender that you get something that resembles broken wheat kernels. Most of us have had cracked wheat bread, and we get a feel for what that will look like. Now, this was what we're going to use. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to use a mixer. You could mix this by hand if you chose to. You could also use a bread machine if you wanted to do it that way. I've put 2 packages of yeast and 2 cups of warm water in my mixer bowl and let them sit for a few minutes to make sure that the yeast is active. To that, I'm going to add 2 cups of flour. Now, in this case, I'm using bread flour. Now, bread flour's got a little bit more protein in it. It gives a little bit better strength to it, and since I'm adding something, the cracked wheat, which will interrupt the gluten formation, I want to use get as much protein content here as I can. Now, if you don't have bread flour, you can use all-purpose flour. However, you may get a little bit lower volume by doing that. It may not work up quite as well for you. Now, in addition to the flour, I'm going to add 3 eggs, 2 tablespoons of salt to help regulate the yeast growth, half a cup of honey, and a half a cup of margarine. This then goes into the mixer and will blend for 3 minutes. After that 3-minute time, we'll come back. You would add up to 5 or 6 more cups of flour, knead that in until it's smooth, and early on in that phase, you're also going to add in the cracked wheat that you've got. We'll break at this point and come back with some dough. Once the dough has risen to double in bulk, you'll need to punch it down, let it rise for another 20 minutes or so. You can refrigerate the dough if you're not going to use it all now. The amount of dough that we have, you can either make rolls with part of it, or you can make about 4 or 5 pizza crusts from it. Just simply roll it out to about a circle about the size of your pizza pan, probably a little bit larger. Now, because you want to put pizza ingredients on this, once you get it the thickness that you want, you can make it basically as thick as you'd like. Try and push the edges of the crust up a little bit so that the tomato sauce and all the other ingredients that you're going to put on it won't fall off. Now, once the dough has been baked, or you're ready to bake it, you can either use something like this, which is a pizza reel, slide it on there and slide it on, and slide it directly onto a pizza stone so it gets good and crispy, or you can put it on a pizza pan, put it on the lowest level in your oven, cook it at 500 degrees or the highest setting that you have for somewhere around 8 to 15 minutes, depending on how thick the crust, what kinds of toppings. You can cook it without them. If you're cooking it without it, take a fork and prick it several times so that it goes clear through, so that the steam will escape during baking and it won't puff up the way bread would. When you get it to this stage, you can use it as you would boba bread. You can also put it in the freezer by wrapping it in plastic wrap a couple of times and then putting in some kind of a freezer bag or wrapping it in heavy-duty aluminum foil. It'll keep probably up to about 3 months before you're ready to use it. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.